But hey, I literally just did a video on best wishes and how it's not as bad as people make it out to be, so maybe I'll be surprised by this movie. I mean, how bad could it be?
One eternity later.
Special thanks to Ow. Okay, this movie just flat out sucks, and unsurprisingly, most of its problems are on the visual end, but it's not just the obvious points. Yes, this animation style was a horrible decision all around, but the problems run much deeper than just bad art style. Considering that almost all of this film is a scene-for-scene remake, that's mostly what I'm going to focus on because it proves just how important visual presentation is. So without further ado, let's get this over with. Much like in the original Mewtwo Strikes Back, Evolution opens on a group of archaeologists searching for a Mew fossil. And almost immediately we discover that the cinematography in this film is completely inappropriate for the tone of the narrative. In the original, most of the opening shots either have the camera completely still or slowly panning across the scenery, and this sense of stillness supports the mysterious tone that the opening scene is trying to set. In Evolution, however, the camera just can't seem to sit still, and there's tons of unnecessary movement jammed into almost every shot. This more energetic type of camera movement clashes with the relatively subdued story being conveyed by the script, so whatever tone it's trying to set is completely ineffective. It's like if the opening scene of Psycho was constantly zooming in and out or quickly panning across the set. This dissonance of tone is constant throughout the film and ultimately leaves it completely toneless because the cinematography is so contradictory to what's happening in the script. Yes, we're not even 30 seconds into the film and it's already completely missed the point. Strap in, kiddos, because this is going to be a long one. As they approach the temple, we see that Evolution has missed yet another important cinematic element by actually showing the full faces of the archaeologists. In the original, all of the human faces are at least partially obscured up until the very last moment when Mewtwo annihilates the laboratory. This presents them as a collective idea of humanity rather than individual people, which is the only way Mewtwo is able to view them at this point. So it's important that this idea is put in the viewer's head early on in order for them to subconsciously empathize with Mewtwo before he murders everyone in a fit of rage. Seeing their faces subconsciously causes us to recognize them as individuals, whether they've been given any personality or not, and thus weakens our empathy for Mewtwo when he kills them. It's not until this very last shot when we finally see the lead scientist's face and his regret over his actions that the idea of Mewtwo as an unstoppable monster that is neither black nor white is put into our minds. Yes, you could make the argument that not drawing the full faces was just a time-saving tool, but that doesn't negate the cinematic effect it has on the movie. Sometimes being limited on what you can do ultimately gives you a better result. It's also pretty apparent that the color design in Evolution is completely ineffective. In the original, this whole scene is filled with huge contrasts of lighting and color, not just because it makes the scene look more striking and impacting, but also because it highlights the mysterious tone that the scene is going for. In Evolution, it's just a big muddled mess of greens and browns, and there's so much shadow over everything that even the more vibrant colors feel kinda bland. It makes this scene both utterly boring to watch and somewhat incomprehensible because so much of it just blends together and takes away the impact from what used to be memorable moments. Also, because the art style is so horribly fake and plastic looking, this whole scene, along with pretty much every scene in the movie for that matter, feels like it's being filmed inside a toy box. These ruins look like mega blocks with cheap plastic plants taped onto them, whereas the incredibly detailed cell animation of the original truly brings this setting to life. I'm not going to harp on the animation itself that much in this video because then we'd be here for literally several hours, but it cannot go understated how fucking abysmal this style is. Going back to Mew though, it's kind of obnoxious how much Evolution shoves Mew in your face during this opening scene. In the original, we never get a clear full body profile of Mew until much later in the movie, and he moves so fast that his existence is almost fleeting in a way. But in Evolution, we're shown several shots of exactly what Mew looks like, and he bounces around so much that it's almost kinda comical. So much for being a mysterious Pokemon, I guess.
By this point you might be thinking, Ember, why can't you just judge this film on its own merits instead of comparing it to the original? Well, the answer to that is because it's practically the exact same story. This isn't so much a remake as it is like a soft reboot or something. Almost every single story beat from the original is still here, but done infinitely worse. If this film wanted to be judged on its own merits, then it should have made at least some attempt to alter the story in a significant way. But it didn't. It gave the same story a different visual presentation without considering the implications behind that. This is just a fresh coat of paint. Except the paint looks like puke, it's made with lead, and the film's forcing you to chug it like a college kid at a frat party. Or perhaps a mildly disturbed Annie-tuber with nothing better to do during a state-mandated quarantine.
Then Mewtwo finally arrives, and we reach the scene that completely sold me on the idea that Evolution was a steaming pile of garbage. Despite these scenes being practically identical in terms of the events that happen in them, they could not be more different in terms of tone and directing. The original scene is dark and oppressive, conveying the ever-growing tension that will arise between Mewtwo and the scientists. Each cut to Mewtwo's visions is punctuated by screeching string attacks to further sell the terrifying presence that he carries. When the test tube starts to crack, he appears almost demonic, like he's ready to destroy everything in his path, and when he finally breaks out, he is constantly covered in shadow, as are the scientists. The broken glass tube that once held Mewtwo still metaphorically holds him, like the hand of science and human ingenuity attempting to keep hold of their precious test subject as he breaks free from their control. Then we get that absolutely brilliant shot of Mewtwo and the scientists silhouetted against the picture of Mew, which I already did an entire analysis of and you can check out in the description, followed by even more shots of Mewtwo and the scientists being separated by objects in the scene, like how they're both filmed through different test tubes. The tension and hostility constantly grows, and upon realizing that the humans are completely ignoring him as an individual being, Mewtwo finally explodes, his anger engulfing the laboratory in fire and smoke as the scientists scream and run for their lives before Mewtwo ultimately blows them all to hell. It's easily one of the greatest scenes from anything that has ever come out of the Pokemon franchise. Meanwhile, in Evolution, we get a slow-mo 360 shot of Mewtwo's test tube shattering in a way that makes him seem like a goddamn action hero. The entire lab is well lit and bathed in that generic futuristic whiteness that sci-fi labs tend to have nowadays. None of the abstract blocking or clever cinematography is present, and most shots are filmed via a circular panning motion. There is zero tension build and barely any use of sound design to convey a rising threat until the very last second, which makes Mewtwo's outburst come out of nowhere, and then the actual attack is filmed like this weird action disaster hybrid with oversaturated color design that feels entirely artificial, removing a more intense sense of fear. Even though it's the exact same scene narratively, the way the scene is presented in Evolution is almost the exact opposite of the original, resulting in a dumpster fire of horrible cinematography and art design.
Wow, this is a disaster.
So the lab blows up, the camera spins around Mewtwo like it's a fucking tilt-a-whirl, and then Giovanni arrives to take Mewtwo back home with him in a scene that, while at least attempting to have interesting blocking, still completely misses the point. In this shot, we see an empty space between Mewtwo and Giovanni, conveying the split between Mewtwo and humanity. However, by the end of the scene, Mewtwo has been won over by Giovanni's speech and agrees to go with him in order to discover his purpose. So this space needed to be filled in with something by the end of the scene in order for it to make sense thematically. In the original, they're filmed as if they're standing in the middle of the same crater, with fire surrounding them on all sides, conveying the idea that Giovanni is here to save Mewtwo from his own power, which works much better as a punctuation for this scene than just leaving a cinematic idea unfinished like it is in Evolution. God, even in the few moments where it does have new ideas, it still manages to fuck it up. Then Giovanni takes Mewtwo to... Okay, you know what? This is taking way too long. As much as I'd love to tear this movie limb from limb down to each minute detail, we actually are going to be here for several hours if I point out every egregious cinematic sin that this film commits. I've already proven that it has no sense for effective cinematography whatsoever, so from here on out I'm going to focus on the scenes that annoyed me the most and why they don't make any goddamn sense. Giovanni takes Mewtwo to Team Rocket. He puts on the mech suit, except this time it's horribly bulky and dumb looking. The camera flies all over the fucking place like a spastic Spearow. This Onyx looks like it's made of foam. Mewtwo says fuck this gay Earth and goes back to the island for some more shitty camera work, and then we finally get the obnoxious and gaudy title card. Yes, it took me over 10 minutes of this video to get through 12 minutes of the movie because I'm a petty asshole and I need to share my pain with you. So we finally get to Ash's introduction, and this scene makes two notable mistakes. First is that they show Mewtwo spying on Ash before his introductory battle even begins, and I simply don't understand why this change was made. In the original version, the frame occasionally gains a slightly staticky filter during Ash's victorious moments in the battle, but we don't know why this is until the fight is over, when it's revealed that someone has been spying on Ash in order to evaluate his skills. We aren't even 100% sure that it's Mewtwo yet, we just see the back of his chair in front of the monitor, and it's not until he creates the storm that we see his hand coming up from the same chair, so the suspense is built up across several scenes before the final reveal. It's a nice little mystery element to keep the viewer engaged during a Pokemon battle that otherwise has no significance. In Evolution, we see that Ash is being spied on before the battle even starts, and after Bulbasaur's victory it actually shows Mewtwo looking at Ash on his monitor, so the mystery of what does this static effect mean is completely dissolved. I guess you could argue that there's still the mystery of why Mewtwo is spying on Ash in the first place, but it's not nearly as interesting as a relatively subtle camera filter that only occasionally pops in for a few seconds. Minor changes that mean basically nothing and only serve to make the film less interesting are not what I'm talking about when I say that this film needed to be different from the original. I'm talking about big, drastic changes that alter the story entirely, because otherwise there's no reason for me to watch this over the original. My second point is one of the few story changes in the film, though admittedly an almost unnoticeable one. And I want to draw attention to this because I've actually seen some people praise this change while missing the entire point of the original version. Near the end of the battle, the challenging trainer sends out 3 Pokemon at once, which are then swiftly dispatched by Ash's Pikachu. In the original version, the Pokemon are Pinsir, Venomoth, and Golem, but in the remake, the Golem is swapped out for a Drowsy, and I've seen some people say that this is a positive change because Golem is a ground type and thus should be immune to Pikachu's electric attacks. But to me, this mindset is entirely misguided. At this point, it's kinda silly to expect complete accuracy from the Pokemon anime in regards to how the games function, because the Pokemon anime has always run on its own logic that, while based on the games to some degree, doesn't follow them exactly. In episode 5, Pikachu's electric attacks become effective against Brock's Onix because it got wet. Ground types in the games don't suddenly become vulnerable to electric attacks after being hit with a water type attack, so almost immediately the Pokemon anime has broken off having a strict relationship with the games in favor of more interesting battle scenarios. Another example would be when Ash travels to Lavender Town to catch a ghost type because he's told they're super effective against Sabrina's psychic types, but this wasn't actually true Mewtwo in the games yet. Ghost types didn't gain this advantage until Gen 2, but because it was the most interesting way to introduce Lavender Town and the ghost types that reside there, the anime forsook the game's logic in favor of something more exciting.
My point is that this apparent logical dissonance has always been part of the Pokemon anime because sometimes ignoring the game's logic allows the anime writers more room to come up with interesting scenarios. Pikachu being able to defeat a Golem with an electric attack isn't a plot hole, but instead an effective use of jobbing. The idea that Pikachu is so powerful that it's able to overcome a severe type disadvantage conveys the idea that Ash is a really strong trainer, and thus is worthy of Mewtwo's invitation. Then, seeing that same Pikachu get ragdolled by Mewtwo further sells just how unparalleled Mewtwo's power actually is. When you change the Golem to a Drowsy, which by the way, is probably one of the least threatening Pokemon I can think of, you lose some of that awestruck feeling of watching Pikachu absolutely annihilate an opponent that it normally shouldn't even be able to damage. You get it? Jobbing. Jesus fucking Christ, every little thing with you plot hole mining losers. Ha!
The last thing I want to point out about this scene is an issue that plagues basically the entire movie. Every so often you'll see a shot that in the original was only 3 or 4 seconds, but in Evolution is padded out to 10 or 15 seconds, and they're usually scenes involving a Pokemon doing something, like this shot where Pikachu is playing with Togepi. My only theory as to why they did this is they wanted to shove more Pokemon doing fun things in the viewer's face, and that's just insulting to pretty much everyone and only serves to drag down the pacing and momentum of these scenes with more horrible animation. So Ash replies to Mewtwo's letter, Mewtwo stirs up Hurricane Fuck Everything to challenge the selected trainers, Ash realizes he doesn't have any Pokemon strong enough to make it all the way to the island, and then...
Oh my god, it's still going. Why is it stopping? Oh, you know what? Fuck this. I can't do this anymore. Later. No, why? No! Make it stop. Make it
There's no knowing where we're rolling, or which way the river's flowing. Is it raining? Is it snowing? Is a hurricane?
Oh my god. Oh my fucking god, I can't believe what I'm seeing. Even on my 3rd time through this, I'm still completely awestruck that this scene made it into the film. If you thought I was exaggerating about this film having a complete lack of tonal awareness up until now, then surely you know what I'm getting at by this point. This brings up another idea that I love about the original, that being how restrained it is. Most of Mewtwo Strikes Back is pretty reserved in the way everything is put together. Very little movement in the beginning to convey a strong sense of tension before Mewtwo finally explodes, a noticeable downplaying of the goofy comedy that was present in the TV series, a tighter but still very downplayed sense of plot progression as each scene slowly builds on the last in order to heighten the conflict between Mewtwo and humanity as much as possible. The original truly felt like a big, important movie that took the story of the TV series to a whole new level. Even though the original version of this scene was easily the goofiest part of the film, it still plays out in a relatively tame manner. There isn't even any background music until everyone spills into the water and it becomes a more intense action scene. So when I get to this same scene in Evolution, and it starts with a fully choreographed musical number, followed up by a roller coaster ride across the sea complete with goofy ass musical accompaniment, I feel physical pain reverberating through my entire body. This is legitimately painful to watch, and the fact that it's over a minute longer than the original scene only makes it more excruciating and makes me seriously consider stopping this video right now. Take me out, coach. I'm done. Get me off Mr. Bones' wild ride. Fuck it. I'm gone. See you later. I forgot I'm still under quarantine, so I can't leave. So they get tossed around in the water, turning what was originally a tense struggle for survival into a quick-time event in a video game that ends with them shooting hundreds of feet into the air instead of just surfacing like normal because everything in this movie is taken to the fucking extreme. And they finally arrive at New Island, which is way over-designed this time around, and I absolutely fucking hate it. The original was simple yet very ominous looking because of how Mewtwo imbued it with a more alien aesthetic, but not so much that you feel like it's beating you over the head, which is exactly what they do in Evolution, and it feels like it's trying way too hard to impress you with visuals that we've already established are complete dog shit. Anyway, they reach the island and go inside. We get to the main hall and the camera flies past this structure, which I will ask you to keep in the back of your mind until later. Introductions from the cannon fodder, blah blah blah. Brock displays his perpetual horniness that was kept out of the original because tone. More really awkward facial expressions because this art style was a fucking mistake. Jesus Christ, how did they let it print looking like this, etc., etc. I know these all sound like a bunch of minor complaints, but when I'm having 2 or 3 minor complaints every minute, it really starts to add up. The Rhyhorn attack looks way less cool because Mewtwo stopped it a few feet before it reaches him instead of stopping it with his palm like a fucking badass. The clones are born accompanied by over-the-top mechanical sound effects and a fog machine instead of the quieter but still unnerving sound design of the original. It makes me wonder if the staff who made this were cinematically competent in any way. Now, I could launch into a discussion about the actual staff behind this film and how the director has barely handled any major projects before being assigned to this one, but honestly, that's all I would have to say, and even I'm not angry enough to speculate on the behind the scenes of this production without any major evidence, so let's just keep going. Fuck, what's next? Oh yeah, the big starter Pokemon fight happens and it's drawn out longer than it needs to be with some kinda hilarious results. Then Mewtwo starts stealing the Pokemon and we get another shot rearrangement that makes a surprise twist less effective. In the original, Ash thinks that he can protect his Pokemon by calling them back to their Pokeballs, and so he does that. Then Mewtwo says it's pointless and his Pokeballs steal them anyway. In Evolution, Ash comes up with his theory, Mewtwo immediately says it's pointless, then we see Ash recall his Pokemon before Mewtwo steals them. I have no idea why they would even make the effort to rearrange this scene, and the only effect it has is to make the surprise less impactful because more time passes between Mewtwo's statement and the actual twist. And then they have Mewtwo verbally explain why he could do this, as if we needed some kind of verbal confirmation that this was possible, and that we weren't capable of thinking, oh, Mewtwo's basically a demigod, so he can just do that. I don't get it, man. So many of these changes are here not because they make the movie better, but seemingly just for the sake of changing something visually to justify this remake. Which, in the end, doesn't justify it at all because it's bad. It's so frustrating, and I really don't know what else to say. We get a close-up of Misty hiding Togepi in her bag instead of it being a throwaway piece of background animation, which ends up drawing attention to it and making us wonder why Mewtwo's Pokeballs couldn't detect Togepi. In the original, you're just supposed to forget that Togepi is there because we can't actually have Togepi fighting itself because it can't fight. It only knows metronome, and that would be a fucking weird fight. You see what I'm getting at? It makes weird changes that only draw attention to its faults rather than covering them up. Like, remember how I told you to keep that DNA-looking structure in the back of your mind a little while ago? So, in the original, this thing isn't actually a staircase. Its surface is mostly a flat slope covered in smooth ridges, which is why Ash slides down it when he slips. I always imagined it was just there for decorative purposes, you know, having a giant helix towering over everyone to convey Mewtwo's genetic dominance. It's a pretty cool image. But in Evolution, they make it an actual staircase, and now I'm forced to ask myself, why make this a staircase? Who uses the staircase? Mewtwo doesn't need it, since he can just levitate wherever he wants. Does Nurse Joy use it? If so, why aren't there any handrails? What if she loses her balance? Ash loses his balance when he's trying to save Pikachu, so it's definitely a possibility. What is the purpose of this staircase? Why is this movie forcing me to ask inane questions like this when it didn't have to turn a decorative structure into a fucking staircase in the first place? Jesus Christ, how much of this fucking movie is left? 35 minutes? Oh, fuck no. Alright, lightning round. Big clone fight starts with Ash looking like he's trying not to poop his pants. The screen is so cluttered with action and the camera moves so fast that none of it actually sinks in and it all turns into white noise. Ash falls from like 50 feet in the air instead of just sliding down it like in the original and lands back first on a stone surface, but miraculously survives despite my pleas for death so that this nightmare might end. The quick zooms are still fucking obnoxious. Ash gets yeeted, but not before giving us this unbelievably hilarious facial expression. The camera still insists on having unnecessary movement during the emotional height of the film when it absolutely needed stillness in order to be as effective as it was in the original. Ikuo Otani gives an acting performance well above what this movie deserves. Ash wakes up, Rapidash's fire effects sear out my corneas, Mewtwo leaves, everyone goes home. They straight up use fucking clip art that is literally the first search result for Lapras on this background building instead of an image that would be more diegetic to this current art style. Credits roll. Fucking done.
I'd like to come up with some kind of solid conclusion paragraph to really tie everything together, but honestly, I'm so worn down by this movie that I just can't. So, here's something tangentially related to the topic that sounds kind of final.
About 2 years ago, I reviewed every single Pokemon movie. And by the end, I concluded that the worst one was movie 17, Victini and Reshiram / Zekrom, which was actually 2 movies with almost identical stories that only differed in which legendary Pokemon was the good guy. I hated these movies not only because they were horribly uninteresting and annoyingly written, but also because of the fact that they made 2 different versions of practically the same experience just to sell an additional product with almost no artistic value. Nothing would have changed if there was only one version except that there'd be one less soulless corporate decision for me to get angry at. And Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution gives me the exact same feeling. It's an almost scene-for-scene remake of the original, but with worse directing, nonsensical cinematography, and horrible animation. It has no positive benefits outside of mining nostalgia or testing a new animation style. And it failed spectacularly on both fronts.
Like, at least the Victini movie, as generic as it was, had an original story. Like, this one just copy-pastes the old script onto new animation, but didn't understand how that script worked visually, so it just looks fucking awful. Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution is the worst Pokemon movie of all time. Please, for the love of God, do not... What the fuck? Oh, Jesus! Fuck! What the fuck are you doing? Making a video? Oh, well, I'm sorry, I'll leave you alone then. I know you're making a fucking video! I meant, what the fuck are you doing? The Mewtwo reboot? Really? Nobody needed this fucking video. Pretty much everyone knew it was gonna be garbage anyway. That's why it didn't get into fucking theaters here. They shat it out on Netflix because no one would watch it otherwise. No one needed this video, so basically, you just ran your mouth for 30 fucking minutes cause you felt like it.
Hey, that's not entirely...
Better yet, what the fuck have you been doing the past 3 months? Best of the year lists, compilation videos, first impressions of shows that have already finished airing, barely edited 3-minute blurbs that you shat out in like 2 hours? Where's the fucking spark, man? Where's the artistry? What happened to this Ember?
Just analysis isn't going to cut it anymore. The days of Ember reviews, just another Anituber, end today.
Face it, you've been doing fuck all for too long. Wasting away cranking out the same old shit you always do because it's easier that way. Well, no more.
It's time you bit the bullet and started caring about something with all your heart and energy. But you can't care about it if you're always holding yourself back in case it doesn't work out.
It's time to step up and actually put that talent you claim to have into action. Wake the fuck up, samurai. We got a website to burn. Okay. Let's get this started.
Special thanks to Jan Rogalski, Rourketon Joing, Christine Seibert, Ryan Johnson, and all my other patrons for their generous support. My name is Ember, and I'll see you next time.